Mr. Biden is set to announce support for the African Union to permanently join the group of 20 at the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, which begins on Tuesday. While some delegation have already arrived in the U.S. Capitol for the event, Mr. Biden is yet to schedule a single bilateral meeting with any of them. And that's a marked contrast with China, America's biggest global rival, which has long pursued personal high-level diplomacy with Africa, while investing heavily in the continent. Kate Fisher has more from Washington, D.C.
The construction of this expressway in Uganda is just one of a myriad of African infrastructure projects being driven by financing from China. China is the continent's largest provider of foreign direct investment, roughly double the level of the US, supporting hundreds of thousands of African jobs. China's also its biggest trading partner, with bilateral trade reaching a record high of $254 billion last year. The US recorded just $64 billion.
The US should be able to compete with China on loans, for instance. It should not be the purview only of China. The US has institutions such as the US Exim Export and Import Bank. There is an institution called the Development Finance Corporation. There's an initiative called Prosper Africa. There's an initiative called Power Africa. All those institutions should be revamped. It's time that every entrepreneur in Africa also know what DFC, which is the Development Finance Corporation, is.
The US's biggest global rival is also on a diplomatic offensive on the continent. Chinese President Xi Jinping holds bilateral meetings with some, if not all, of his African counterparts at the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation Summit every 3 years. Contrast that with the US-Africa Leaders Summit this week in Washington, where as yet there are no one-on-one meetings scheduled with President Biden. The White House has said that each delegation will have extensive opportunities for high-level engagement.
The president's time is limited. So that's the practical problem. At the same time, I think that not doing this is a real missed opportunity, and I think it is worth trying to make the time in some fashion. You are competing at the person-to-person level with countries like China, not just China. Other countries also try to reach out more to the Africans.
Thank you.
In a signal that the Biden administration has heard Africa's concerns, Secretary of State Antony Blinken launched the new U.S. strategy towards sub-Saharan Africa in South Africa, one of Washington's fiercest critics on the continent. In acknowledging that Africa is likely to be home to a quarter of humanity by 2050, with a younger workforce than the rest of the world, the strategy aims to build a new economic, political and democratic partnership with the continent, addressing issues including climate, food insecurity and terrorism. Other high-level US officials, including US Ambassador to the United Nations Linda Thomas-Greenfield and US Agency for International Development Administrator Samantha Power, have visited different African countries earlier this year.
Please have a seat.
But President Biden is yet to visit sub-Saharan Africa and has met with fewer African heads of state than either President Obama or President Trump at this same point in their tenures. President Biden has made it clear that his foreign policy focus is the Indo-Pacific. Yet by paying less attention to other parts of the world, his administration may end up bolstering China's global influence. Kate Fisher, CNA, Washington.